All right, I want to welcome everybody back as we get ready for our second session here in room 1 for FTC Kickoff Day. We are pleased to have Team 6133, the Nuts, here presenting about FTC Scouting. Off to you guys, Nuts.
All right. Hello, everyone. We want to thank you for joining us today. And we are Team 6133, the Nuts, from One Hills High School in Cincinnati, Ohio. And today we're going to be presenting to you about scouting and First Tech Challenge. If you guys have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat and we'll cover them at the conclusion of the presentation. Okay, let's first start out in general terms as to what is scouting and why should you do it. Scouting is the process of data collection in FTC, collecting data about other teams' strengths, weaknesses, and general abilities, and then using this data to formulate strategies, and then in the picking phase of competition, compose the strongest alliance possible. In this presentation, we're going to go over 3 main types of scouting, the different methods of data collection, and then ways to analyze that data. There's 3 types of scouting that we've recognized. The first is pre-event scouting. This is usually done through online resources or interaction, as well as viewing the video runs of different teams. So oftentimes, teams might have a YouTube channel that they'll post their runs onto, and just viewing these runs can give you a general idea of the team. This will usually occur, again, before competition. The second form of scouting is pit scouting. So this is, at this point, we're starting to get into competition, but it's not quite the robot matches yet. Pit scouting will be done early on in the competition and is usually done by talking to teams while they're at their pits or while they're on the practice field or while they're at inspection and just getting a general idea of their abilities again, but this time it's in person. The third type of scouting that we've recognized is live data collection. So this is when you're actually getting into that day's matches and you're really viewing what that team can do on the field, not just in practice, but on that very day.
Before you actually start to scout, you want to know what you need to collect so that you're not lost while scouting. And we believe that you can categorize this information in 3 bigger groups, like knowing the game, knowing yourself, knowing your opponents. So first off, of course, you need to know what the game is all about, because if you want to win, you want to be the team with the most points. So you want to know the different objectives of the games, such as in FTC Skystone last season. You want to, there are points from collecting stones, from stacking stones on the foundation, from moving the foundation in different, like an autonomous and teleop or an endgame. And then you also want to know, are there more points that are there more valuable points than others within the match? Such as in the autonomous period, the sky stones were more than just the normal stones. It also goes into another point of, are there opportunity, like limited point opportunities? Because to get the extra points of the sky stones, you have to get that stone first or second to get those bonus points added on. But also you need to know your own bot's capabilities and your own alliance capabilities. For example, if your bot is really good at collecting the stones, you want to be able to, if you can scout out teams that are really good at stacking, that can really help you fill the gap in which you might be not as strong in. And also, last season, there was a human player component, and you also want to scout like other teams' human players, because there were times where we were in matches, and the other teams, like our partner's human player, would not be paying attention. They'd be kind of looking around. And that really that hurt our performance in some matches because they weren't putting the stones down when we needed them to. You also want to make sure that you can find, you can scout teams with like good human players. But then also you want to know your opponents as well, because knowing your opponents will let you know what they're able to do, and that can help you strategize with your partners in order to beat them. Knowing what your opponents can do can really help formulate different ideas on ways to beat like counter strategies.
Now, once you have all this information and you know what you need to collect, the different media for collecting are pretty straightforward. First of all, there's paper. With paper, assuming you create your data sheet, it's pretty customizable. It's analog, you're doing it by hand, so you can write as much or as little information as you need. You can add extra unexpected notes, especially very weird instances during matches. A team may be able to do something that's unique that you've never seen before. The drawbacks with paper, it's not like it's online where multiple people can access it and write at once. You can obviously pass around your piece of paper, but it won't be the same as our next method of collecting. So with Google Docs, Sheets, Excel, you can typically have multiple people accessing this information. It's quick and easy data input. The only drawback would be during tournaments last year, or tournaments period, internet access may be limited. So having multiple team members access this information may be pretty difficult. Now, the next method would be applications, different mobile apps. These are very helpful for during match scouting, being able to take points that a team makes instantly and put them on in a digital form. And then you can take this information back and put it either on paper or on a Google Sheet, Doc, Excel, etc. The main drawback with this is pretty much the same as with Google Docs and Google Sheets. Internet access, if required, may be limited, so you may not be able to use this in the first place. Now, there are other ways of collecting information during a match or even prior to a match, and these would be different online FTC databases. Our primary examples are Orange Alliance and FTCstats.org. Now, Orange Alliance is very good for during tournaments because it shows live updates usually of teams' rankings, their win-loss ratios, their scores. This is very good for knowing how teams are doing even if you're not watching matches at the time. This also helps when you're going into a line selection, knowing exactly how you're ranked, how to rank yourself against other teams, and knowing who to pick or who might pick you. Now, before you even go to a tournament, you're going to want to know who you're up against. FTC Stats is really good with this because it shows different teams standing and ranking from other tournaments prior. Knowing this information will give you a good idea of what you may be up against, how to strategize, what you may need to prioritize going into a tournament. Now, once you have all this information, you're going to want to analyze it and be efficient in the way you do that. So you're going to want to divvy up or relegate different teams to different team members. As far as scouting goes, you don't want to give too many teams to one person because your data will be not completely in depth. You also want to be organized in the way you have your data set up, because eventually you're going to have to look back at all the stats of every team from the tournament in order to rank them and strategize going into either line selection or the finals themselves.
Okay, so now that we've gone over like the different methods of data collection and what you want to be looking for while you're scouting, namely the team's performance and perhaps their OPR, we're going to go into just a couple of general tips and pointers that we've collected from our experience scouting. Our first tip is simply to visit the inspection field and the practice field. So really scouting is a process that should start as soon as you enter the tournament. So that's as soon as you're going through the inspection process, feel free to look around and talk to other teams. Look at their robots. A lot of the time, you can kind of get an idea of like what a team might be capable of or what you want to make sure you focus on when you're viewing that team from the second you see their robot. Also, a little trick is the inspection process is a lot of the time the closest you're going to get to some of these robots. So again, take advantage of this fact and feel free to look at their designs and talk to them. Our second tip is going into autonomous. So oftentimes it's useful to print out a field diagram and draw your own paths and then use that to compose a strategy with your alliance partner. So when you're preparing for a competition, oftentimes you're going to be practicing solo on your own field and running your autonomous that way. but that's not really comparable with how things are actually going to go at a competition. You're going to have to run with your partner, and if you guys collide in the middle of a match or at autonomous, that can cause all sorts of problems in the teleop phase. So it's not just being consistent with your own autonomous, but also making sure that when your partner is on the field as well, you're not going to run into any issues. So make sure you're talking to your partner all throughout the day, whether it be the qualification match or elimination matches, and make sure you know what your autonomous programs are going to do beforehand. Our third tip goes into just making sure that you have all the data that you're able to collect and making sure that your data is consistent throughout the day. So always make sure that you have people scouting in the stands and make sure that your scouters know that they're scouting and are dedicated to that job. That's also going to sort of go into tip number 4 then, which is to make sure that your scouters are assigned properly to their teams before the match, and also make sure that you're not double assigning a scouter. So make sure that you don't have one guy looking after 2 bots, especially on 2 different sides. It's already hard enough, honestly, to look after one robot. Oftentimes the stands are going to be pretty far from the matches. But also make sure that you're not, for some reason, giving one bot to 2 different people, so you have conflicting data, perhaps. Again, going into tips 3 and 4, make sure that your scouters are consistently scouting. A personal anecdote is that oftentimes we might have a scouter who maybe gets a little absent-minded and they start dropping a couple matches. And once you lose that slack, someone else on your team is going to have to pick it up. So make sure you're looking after your team and making sure that no one person is overworked. Okay, so tip number 5 is especially important if you're an alliance captain, and that's really knowing how the picking phase is going to work. So in general, you can be a captain without being the first pick, right? It goes through 1 through 4. So in other words, you might have a number 1 ranked team, but that team could already get picked before you have the chance to pick. So in turn, you have to make sure that you're always keeping a list of the teams that you want in order of priority, and make sure that if the team you really wanted gets picked, you have a backup plan and you're able to go down that list and still compose an optimal team. Later on in that paragraph for tip number 5, we have a bit of the rulings that go into how selection is going to work. So in short, for competitions with 21 or more teams, make sure that you're picking at least 12 rankings. And for less than 21 teams, make sure you have at least 8 teams on your list. Okay, tip number 6 sounds a little counterintuitive, but it's to scout your own team during matches. So why might you do that? You already know yourself and your own competition, your own capabilities, right? But really just having a record of your own matches through that day will give you solid data, and that can be very important for convincing other teams to pick you, right? It's not just about picking other teams, obviously. So collect data about yourself and analyze that data. So if you can run a statistic and it shows that your team is incredibly consistent, you can use that to approach another team that's in the picking position and say, look, our robot is really consistent, and it's not just my word that says that. If you look at our average OPR or our OPR for that day, it's extremely high, and we have no outlying matches. We have no matches that say our robot disconnected and we don't know why. Then finally, tip number 7 is simply to get out there and expose your team. Get out there and advertise your team to other teams. Talk to people. Obviously, you don't want to get carried away because this is a robotics competition after all, but make sure you're talking to other teams. In the times that we've been in picking positions, just having a team come up to you and talk to you and tell you why they think you should pick them, definitely will change your perspective on that team. And it might lead you to go back and reevaluate their scores for that day and really figure out their story and figure out why their matches went as they did. So talking to other people is a great strategy. And especially if you're in the position where you're not in a, especially if you're not in a picking position, you're going to have to seek out other teams. It's also important to talk to other people during the qualification matches. So not just in between qualifications and elimination matches. Just talk to your partner again before you're running a match and make sure you've formulated a good autonomous strategy and in-game strategy. There have been times where we have gotten into competition and perhaps you neglect that part, and then you get on the field and you don't really know what's going on, who's doing what task. This is especially important for endgame. So again, just talk to your partner and break the ice a little bit.
So you might have noticed a lot of these like tips and tricks deal with human interaction at competitions. And as you know, this year it's going to be it's going to be a lot different actually, since it's all going to be online. So you're probably wondering like if teams should still scout each other because it's all online. And I think you should scout each other. Because a whole purpose of scouting is to strategize and to learn from other teams. Like watching other teams, how they play, how they work, it can really help you learn what their bot does differently from yours. If they're doing anything better than you, you can learn how they're doing it and maybe incorporate something similar to your own bot so that your bot works better now. And first itself, it's a learning opportunity for everybody. That's one of the main goals, is to learn in a fun and engaging way. So you should still scout each other. And of course, when you do scout, you still want to know what's important to collect. You still want to watch the other teams, what they're doing. You want to know what's the best way for your own team to collect data, whether it be the paper method, the apps, the sheets. And since there's not going to be any in-person competitions, it's going to be hard to view other teams. So we recommend teams like posting a practice run or two on their YouTube channel or on their Twitter or their Insta, whatever social medias they might have, to allow other teams to be able to watch each other and learn from each other. Because at the end of the day, it's all about learning with robots, of course.
That now concludes our formal presentation. We'll answer any questions, comments, or concerns you may have.
Any questions?
I'll give you one. So during competition, when you've gathered all of your data, how do you download that data to your team members so you can re-strategize?
Well, last year we mostly used the paper method. So before a match, we would print out sheets, enough for like every team that would be there. And we would record information on those sheets. And then when we were strategizing, we would lay out the sheets. Or like if during a match we saw any team that really stood out to us, we would star them in the corner so that we could find them more easily while we're strategizing. And we would just, as a team, just lay out the sheets, look through them, talk about what we noted during the matches, and just like start ranking the teams if we wanted to pick, if we were in a picking position, or if we want who we want to market ourselves to if we were not in a picking position.
I guess I'll give you guys a question.
All right.
So when you go with a fairly quantitative route, like if you're tracking something on a Google form, how do you balance that with other qualitative factors when you're making your scouting decision? Like if you see something cool in a robot that you think could complement you really well, but there's not really a space for it on your scouting form, if you will.
Well, yeah, during last season, especially with our paper method, we definitely noted all the weird quirks other robots would have on the papers. So when we did go back and eventually look, as a team, we would typically, anything memorable, we would be able to talk about with each other, because we did it more in like a roundtable discussion at the end, and everyone had input as to who we thought would work best with us, or who we thought we should market ourselves to as well. And so these quirks definitely factored in, and also talking with other teams, getting to know each other, talking about different aspects of our team outside of the robot definitely assisted in our conversations with ourselves in determining what teams we wanted to talk to and who we wanted to work with.
In the
Awesome.
case that you are like using a more digital method like the Google Sheets, you might also consider just including like a comment section on that form. Or you might even reach across and include a paper aspect. Maybe you could have the scouters have a notebook where they simply record the different notes that they have about other teams. And again, this doesn't have to solely be on their competitive performance. This can also just be aspects of their robot that you recognize and find interesting.
All right, thank you.
We have a question in the chat. Sorry.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I was gonna mention the question in the chat was about OPR, which is one of my favorite ones. So could you guys please explain OPR?
Sure. So OPR stands for offensive power rating, which really just means like your point contribution in a match. So like it shows you like your basically how many points you're contributing per match to your alliance.
Andrew, could you go back to that slide with the Orange Alliance?
Oh. Give me 1 second.
You made him go backwards. That was a bad choice.
The point I was starting with.
Okay. So yeah, essentially, OPR will help you determine how good a team is by itself, essentially. So what you could expect them to contribute if you were to work with them as an alliance partner. We had another question in the chat. How helpful is scouting every team in each match compared to cutting down midway through competition and only looking at certain teams?
We still think you should scout every team. Like no, even if they seem to be doing like more worse off, because there are many different factors to their performance. Such as maybe they got a partner that's just not compatible. Like if they're both really good at getting stacking the stones, but neither team can really collect the stones well, that could be a factor. So they might, if you're really good at collecting stones and not as good at stacking, you would still want to know that they're out there, so that if you're in a picking position, you would want to pick them to help fill in that gap.
Yeah, I as well. I also think it's really important to make sure that you're scouting all the matches for a team. Sometimes teams might run into like technical issues like disconnects and then solve that later in the competition. And then from that point, they start performing well. So I think sometimes if you just stop scouting that team, you might miss that sort of aspect of their performance. Example of this that I can think of is in one of the Ohio State competitions back in relic recovery, there was a team that that everyone going in knew was pretty good, but at that tournament, and had expected to perform well, but at that tournament they suffered a lot of disconnects, and therefore their performance was not optimal. That team still got picked though because people went up to that team and talked to them, and it turned out that the reason for their performance was due to a technical issue. So I think it's important to keep an open mind and always look for different avenues to find a team that is compatible. I think sometimes if you stop collecting data, you're kind of just closing off your options. So I would always say, make sure you're looking out for teams. Sometimes teams can have a rough start, but then end up being one of the best alliance partners at that tournament.
So a couple things. I'm going to answer the one question we have out here, and then we're going to go on to how many scouts you should have when scouting. But I'm going to answer the other question. This is, you have to be ready to pick a team. I said with remote events this year, and you guys need to make sure you guys read through the remote event handbooks, the books for this year, because they're very specific to remote events and what we're going to be doing in the state of Ohio. So there will not be any alliances during a remote event. It's going to be all based on you as an individual team scoring this year. So the alliance thing, but that doesn't mean that you guys aren't going to be wanting to pay attention to what everybody else is doing this year, as they said in their scouting about, you know, your team as a whole making YouTube videos and everything. So people can see what you're doing, because we are still at this point in time planning on doing an in-person state tournament. So unless something changes or something, I said that's still the plan, is to have it in person. So alliances at that point, you're going to want to know what everybody can do who's showing up at that state tournament. All right.
Thank you.
So, okay. So now the question of how many scouts should you have? I said, I know that's a rough one, but a long day depends on how many people you want to be doing that work. So go ahead. You guys can answer that.
Yes, of course. Okay. So in general, the sort of cop-out answer is going to be, you should have as many scouts as many scouting sheets as there are teams at the tournament. It really would be optimal to make sure that you're looking after every team. Now, in some cases, your team might not be that large. It might be really hard to get enough people out there to scout everybody. So in that case, if you're put in that position, I think maybe the first round you can sort of scout everybody and get a general idea, and then maybe then you could pick the teams that you want to focus on and look out for. But also keep in mind that just the match structure does not really make it too useful to just only look after one team, because they're not always going to be competing. And then going back to this slide, if you're put in that position, just make sure that you always have 12 rankings or 8 rankings if you're picking. That's really the most important part.
And I just want to add, like, for people, you want to try to have at least 4 people scouting a match at a time, so that there can be one person per bot. But of course, if you have a smaller team and half your team is on the drive train, you only have a couple people left, it might be a little harder to do that. So you can try doubling up if you want to, but that's really hard when there's all these bots moving around doing their own thing. Like we've tried doubling up before, and it just doesn't work, to be honest. But if you can, I would try to get at least 4 people, and then just switch out people if they get tired, depending on your team size, of course.
And for clarification, when we say scout yourselves, you want to scout yourself as if you were a different team, and eventually you're going to rank yourself along with your rankings for other teams. This will help you. Sometimes alliances or captains will pick each other, and so you may move up and become a captain yourself. So you definitely want to know how you're ranked against those other teams, and that may even be a possibility, because you then want to have choices for picking your own alliance partners as well.
All right, do we have any more questions for the guys from the Nuts? While I'm waiting for you guys to think about it, I'm going to give you guys our code word for the scouting session. Our code word for the scouting session is Velociraptor. That's an awesome one. Just trying to figure out how to fit that in to general conversation. Cannot figure out how to put Velociraptor into just general conversation this morning. So our code word is Velociraptor for this session.
Well, if you guys want to contact us, can you guys last right?
Yeah.
We have a few different ways for you to contact us. We have our Twitter account, which is at WHHSnuts, which is also the same as our Instagram account, if you want to contact us through that. We also have our email up, which is our team email, sumum6133@gmail.com. And we're always happy to help if you guys have any more questions that may come up later on.
Yeah, and that QR code should lead to a copy of this presentation in case you want to go over its contents. But feel free to reach out to us at any time.
All right, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Walnut Hills, FTC team, the Nuts. Thank you guys for your presentation. I think everybody had a good time with that today. We will be taking a 15-minute break now, and then we will go on to first alumni experience with Tyler and Kelly at, looks like we'll be starting that at 10:30. So thank you guys for presenting, and we'll see you guys later.